Hey guys, how's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we'll be doing a direct hands-on comparison between the all-new 3DS, which they're just calling the new 3DS, and we're just going to be comparing against the older previous generation 3DS to see if there's any real big differences, both in terms of internally and externally. Now, starting straight off the bat, we're going to take a look at the physical differences between these two handheld gaming systems. Now, when we measure the actual physical differences in terms of pocketability, when we close up the lids on the two devices, you can see that the older version of the 3DS is actually a little bit smaller. It measures about 74 millimeters in terms of depth and about 130 millimeters in terms of width. And taking a look at the new 3DS, it actually is a little bit deeper, measuring about 80.6 millimeters and wider at 142 millimeters. Now, taking a look at the thickness of the two gaming consoles, you can see that they're pretty much identical when you're just looking at them in real life. But in actual fact, the older 3DS is slightly thinner, just under 21 millimeters, and the new 3DS measures about 21.6 millimeters. Furthermore, when we take a look at the weight, the older version of the 3DS measures 226 grams versus 253 grams on the new 3DS. Now, in terms of ergonomics and the feel in the hand, I do like how the new design is a little bit more curved and a little bit more comfortable to hold, even though it's slightly a little bit larger. Now, when you are holding the older version, you can see it's a little bit more square and it has a little bit more sharper edges, but in terms of the weight, it is kind of nice that it is a little bit lighter than the new version. But in terms of the new version, I think it has a little bit more comfortability factors in terms of holding it in your hand for a long time, although I've never heard anybody really complain about the older 3DS not being comfortable. Now, one thing you'll notice on the new 3DS that there's a couple of different actuating points on when the actual screen stops and clicks into place when you open the screen. It basically has 3 points where it clicks in. It first clicks in at a 120-degree angle, which makes it perfect for a whole bunch of different viewing situations. Then it clicks in around 170 degrees and then full 180 degrees if you want to lay it flat and use it that way. Now, the older 3DS basically didn't click at all until you get to the 170-degree point where it's almost parallel to the bottom portion of the device, and of course you can lie it flat down as well. One thing is certainly an improvement is that the older 3DS, if you flopped it around, that screen would is very loose on there. It's not very tightly fastened in, versus the new one is certainly built a little bit better and it kind of holds its position a little bit better as well. Now, one cool thing Nintendo has added is that you now have the ability to change the front and back plates of the new 3DS, and in fact you can use the stylus to actually pry open the front plate, so the stylus doubles as a tool. Now, in order to remove the back plate, you do have to open up 2 screws using a Phillips head screwdriver, which isn't that big of a deal, but once you do, you also have access to your new battery, which is slightly bigger than the previous generation 3DS, as well as a micro SD expansion slot, which is a much smaller form factor card than the standard SD card that you get on the older 3DS. Now, let me take you on a quick tour around both devices so you kind of have a feel and understanding of where things are on the new 3DS. We'll start at the very front of the gaming consoles. And the first thing you notice that they both have the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack located at the center. Now, you'll notice they actually removed the game cartridge slot from the back to the front on the new 3DS. The older generation obviously had that slot located at the back, and it's kind of more convenient when it's at the front. Next to the headphone jack, you have your stylus, which is a little bit smaller than what you found in the previous generation 3DS, especially to the fact that the older generation 3DS was telescopic, which was certainly a nice feature. It's kind of sad they took that away. It was kind of nice to actually adjust the length of your stylus versus just having one fixed length that you have on the new 3DS. Taking a look at the rear side of both devices, you can see that, as we mentioned before, the game slot has moved to the front of the device on the new 3DS. And really the biggest change over here has to be the addition of the ZL, ZR bumper buttons, which in terms of feel themselves, they feel very similar to the bumpers that you would traditionally find on the left and right side on the corners at the rear of the device. And they're very easy to basically trigger, and they're just perfect for any finger size, any kind of hand size. I think everyone's going to have no real issues in terms of reach. And certainly with the addition of these two sets of bumper buttons, it's going to closer match up to what you would find in a larger home-based console, because most controllers these days have at least two sets of bumpers. Now, opening up the two gaming consoles, you can see that there are a couple of differences that are straight away apparent. Now, both the rear and front-facing cameras on both DSs are identical. They're both VGA resolution, and the rear-facing camera, obviously with the dual camera configuration, can shoot stereoscopic 3D images, which are at the same quality. However, one thing you'll notice is that the new 3DS actually has a wider speaker configuration. The dots are a little bit more spread apart, and overall the sound quality is not that much improved at all from the last generation 3DS, but the volume and the amplitude has certainly changed. The speakers, I find, are a little bit louder than the previous generation. Now, one thing you'll notice is they've actually moved the volume dial from the side of the device to the top portion of the screen, making it more symmetrical to the dial on the opposite side, which is the 3D dial. One thing I like about the new volume dial is that it is a lot more smoother. The other cool thing I like about the new 3DS is that on the volume dial, if you go all the way to the off position, you can actually click that in, and it gives you a nice satisfying click. Now, moving on to the lower bottom, the actual circle pads on these two devices from a technical standpoint shouldn't be too different, but in terms of the feel overall, both of these two devices are brand new, so I haven't really worn them out yet. So the overall feel of the button will probably change as you use them accordingly, but both of them should be pretty comparable at this stage because they're both brand new devices. Now, the one thing that has certainly changed is that they've completely redone the select home start button configuration. On the older generation, you had this flat mounted surface control base, which was really finicky. I didn't like it at all. It was really hard to press the button to activate a certain command because there's no real boundary of where a button starts and stops because it's just a flush mount control interface. And as you can see on the new 3DS, it's certainly much more well improved. You basically have a nice large home button that is easy to press, easy to access, no confusion, no mishits at all, and the start select button is at a great appropriate place. Even though the buttons are small, they're very easy to reach and very easy to actuate. And this whole design interface is a great classic Nintendo design and certainly has proven to work in the past. Now, moving on, the new theme of the new 3DS that's going to be carried both in this model and on the LL, the larger 3DS model that's going to come out soon, is that they've used the color scheme on the old Super Nintendo and Super Famicom controller A, B, X, Y buttons. So you have that great blue, green, red, yellow color combination, which is so iconic and it really pops out of the device. It really makes it a signature piece. And the overall feel of it is not too much different from the last generation 3DS, but it certainly has a little bit more of a smoother tactile response that I kind of gravitate more towards. Now, really one of the biggest change to the new 3DS in terms of controlling interface has to be the inclusion of the new C-Stick, which is basically a rubber nub that allows you to access a couple of more controlling options in your games and in your menu systems. It's basically something typically you would find in a laptop, and it measures the pressure sensitivity on directional movements and things like that. Now, the C-Stick itself doesn't really rotate or move in any way whatsoever. It really stays stationary. It's not like another analog stick or anything like that, or something like what you would find on the circle pad. It's really there to enhance some of the gameplay control interfaces and give you new options, new controls for all these games that they're going to be developing with the C-Stick in mind. Now, interestingly enough, there's already games such as Super Mario Smash Bros. 3DS, Dragon Quest X Online, Final Fantasy Explorers, and Monster Hunter 4G that already are utilizing the C-Stick in mind, and you could do some really cool, innovative stuff with that control interface. Now, taking a look at the top screens themselves, you can see that the new 3DS is slightly larger, measuring about 3.88 inches versus about 3.53 inches on the older generation. Now, in terms of resolution, they're both identical in terms of that, and the bottom screen is also slightly larger, 3.33 inches versus 3.02 inches on the older 3DS, and again, same resolution and overall kind of quality. Now, the big highlight on the screen is that we now have full stereoscopic vision in virtually any angle that the camera can see you on a new 3DS. So when you go up and initially set up the whole 3DS, it'll actually track your head movement pretty accurately and it'll adjust the screen accordingly. Now, the whole feature of the 3D system works extremely well. It hiccups every now and then, but overall, 98% of the time, it's extremely accurate and giving me a pretty good 3D experience with plenty of depth. And again, with that depth slider, I can control the amount of 3D, but that big hurdle of making sure that the person is in completely at the center of the screen is not an issue anymore. And that's a real big promise to being successful in the 3D market. And this is certainly proving to me so far that the 3D screen is certainly worth it. Now, internally, when taking a look at the processors on these two 3DSs, you can see that the newer generation 3DS has a couple of different upgrades. They're both using the same ARM11 chip developed by Nintendo. It's a dual-core processor, but it's clocked at 2.66 megahertz on the older 3DS and 532 megahertz on the new 3DS. Additionally, you have 256 megabytes of RAM on the new 3DS and 128 megabytes of RAM on the older generation. So definitely some minor improvements to give your games a little bit more fluidity and to certainly make the operating system a little bit more faster. Now, in terms of GPUs, they're both using similar GPU architecture, but again, there's a couple of minor upgrades that they've done to the new 3DS in terms of clock speed. We now have a higher speed of 266 megahertz versus 133 megahertz on the older generation. We also have an upgraded VRAM system at 10 megabytes of video RAM versus 6 megabytes on the older generation. Now, sadly, in reality, the gameplay and the graphical performance on the new 3DS isn't improved at all from the last generation 3DSs and XLs out there. Basically, you have the same exact graphical capabilities because the games right now are being developed with the current generation in mind. Now, next year, you're going to have games like Xenoblade Chronicle, which are going to really take advantage of some of the upgraded hardware inside the new 3DSs, and you're going to see some minor improvements in terms of graphical capabilities, just not on the current titles right now. Now, one thing is certainly apparent is that when you actually use the device in terms of just going through the operating system and browsing the web and things like that, everything is a little bit more snappier and a little bit more quicker in response. So what you notice is when you're browsing the webs and loading up different websites, they're a little bit more quicker to come up on the new 3DS, generally speaking. In most cases, they're pretty similar, especially if you have a strong Wi-Fi signal connection. But one thing is certainly apparent is when you press the home button and you're on an app or game and things like that, it's a lot faster on the new 3DS. They certainly improved that feature quite a bit. It's a couple of seconds, actually. It's pretty significant. Additionally, when you boot up or turn on both of the gaming devices at the same time, you'll also notice that the new 3DS is quicker to boot up. It also loads your games a little bit faster as well. So if you're kind of in the market to upgrade because you're kind of tired of waiting for your 3DS to respond, I think there's a couple of different minor tweaks in here that is going to be worth upgrading once this thing is officially released all around the world in 2015. Now, the last thing that I'll talk about is just the general battery life performance on these new 3DSs. Basically, on the new 3DS, we have a larger battery, as we saw before, by just 100 milliamp hours, but they've improved the internal battery management system, and the power saving mode is definitely improved a little bit as well. So basically, if you have the screen at a lower brightness and have auto brightness turned off, you can easily get 6.5 hours to 6 hours of a 3DS full 3D gameplay, no problem. Obviously, you'll have up to like 10-12 hours of DS gameplay on the new 3DS. Now, the older generation 3DS was not bad. It got somewhere around 3 to 5 hours depending upon what games you're playing in 3DS mode, and obviously depending upon your brightness, but certainly an hour at least an improvement on the newer side. But on that, guys, that's really it. Now, overall, you'll notice that there isn't much of a drastic difference between the new 3DS 3DS and the previous generation 3DS. I think in most regards, Nintendo is really not a company that makes drastic changes to their hardware. They're not so crazy on this world of specification and having the fastest everything. But in terms of speed and the overall kind of package you get, I certainly think that this is a definitely a good step in the right direction. At least they have some improved hardware in there. But really what's going to count is the games. Now already there's some great games out there for the DS, and the 3DS lineup is amazing as well and growing ever vastly. And really this is where Nintendo shines. So if you're in the market for a new 3DS, I think review this video and also take a look at my 3DS XL versus all the new 3DS and see which one is right for you. But overall, I think these new 3DSs are quite fantastic. And if you have any specific questions, please make sure to leave that on a comment down below. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. That really helps us out, and we'll see you later. Take care.